This video is brought to you by All Parts. All Parts is celebrating over 40 years of delivering premium tools for tone. Upgrade your rig today at allparts.com.
Hello everyone, welcome back to the second installment of our in-house video series entitled Don't Do It Yourself. I want to thank Premier Guitar for hanging out with us today. I'm Greg Voros, and with me is my number one in the shop foreman, Mr. Tony Nagy. All right, what do we have going on here, Tony?
We're going to make some pick guards.
Sure looks that way.
Oh, I love making pick guards.
I do too. All right, so we have all the rough materials here. It's going to be a super long day for us because we're going to be cooking here, so let's get to it. Cheers. Hey guys, so the Don't Do It Yourself series here at Groom Guitars really has everything to do with preserving these vintage instruments. There's a finite amount of these instruments out there, and these are not instruments that folks should be repairing themselves in a do-it-yourself kind of way. There's many reasons behind that, but I guess the main one, the repairs carried out on vintage instruments has everything to do with its current market value.
You should consider it being like restoring collectible art.
Right.
You know, it needs to be as original as possible first. And any repairs that are done that can't have the actual original materials need to look original and like they belong.
So when you're making a bound pickguard for an archtop instrument, you're actually not risking damaging that instrument, because you're working away from the instrument in building this pickguard. The reason building a bound pickguard made it into this video series, one, is that it's really somewhat of a lost art, I think, and we want to preserve that and show folks how it's done and why it should be respected. But this is also a don't do it yourself, because these materials are incredibly expensive. Tony and I have made literally hundreds and hundreds of these bound pickguards for all these different models. So we have a lot of experience in making these pickguards, but there's a thin line between a great guard and a failed guard.
It's so subtle sometimes of getting the lines just so, and it's about the entire presentation of the instrument. If you think about on a D'Angelico, like on a New Yorker, the guard draws your eye. I mean, and if it isn't right, you can tell immediately, and it absolutely disrupts the entire look of the aesthetic of the instrument. When you're making these in batches,
yes,
it makes sense if you're making the same pick guard to make a plexiglass template.
That's right.
However, there are so many variations, even in the same model. Like when we look in how many different kinds of L5 pick guards are different lengths, different widths, different shapes. Sometimes you have to do a lot of one-offs, even though we'd like to make batches of them. And so we're going to show you how to do that method today, where we take a photocopy and attach it to the piece of plastic we'll use as a core, and then cut that out.
That's right. All right, let's get to it, Tony. All right, guys, so as I finished truing up one of the cores, I'm gonna go ahead and do the rest of them right now, but if you guys will notice, I'm using an oscillating spindle sander when I'm actually truing it up. That's very, very important. If you don't use an oscillating spindle sander, the celluloid, the makeup of the plastic itself makes it so that it can burn up really fast. And then you have little fireballs, and that's not fun. So you cannot take this to a belt sander, or it'll be problematic for sure. It's not gonna go well at all. Show them, Tony. So we're going to go ahead and remove our photocopy from the cores. We're going to clean them up just a little bit to make sure that everything is nice and flat and square. Once the papers are taken off, I'm going to come back, and if anything that I feel that might not look good with the finished product, I'm going to go ahead and touch that now. Traditionally, when these bound pickguards are made, the way it was done for many, many years was that all of these, the white and black plies were first laminated, and then they were adhered to the core, all while heating the plastic plies to conform to the curves of the pickguard itself. Once you get up to the points where the plastic binding actually meets, they're usually met with two miter joints, one on either side. I found that if you actually bind the pickguard one layer at a time with a series of lap joints, what you will have at the end of it is a perfect non-existent miter, and all of it becomes one solid piece. We are going to show you guys exactly what that looks like, but not before we get into adhesives. I found that the best adhesive to use when making bound archtop pickguards are actually solvents. You have quite a few different solvents to choose from, but really a slurry and a combination of a few of them is going to be your money adhesive. The solvents that we're going to wind up using are actually bite into the plastic itself. After a day or two of curing, what you'll wind up having is one solid mass. You want to use a solvent that's not going to flash too fast, or else it won't give you time to bond. So there is a little concoction and a recipe that you can make that makes it so you have enough work time. It bites. It doesn't overbite because it'll mush the plastic if you squeeze a little hard, and it makes for an incredible bond. Let's get into it. I always start with the curve. Once you get the plastic on the core itself, and because I used a solvent, it's actually biting in there as I'm doing it. So it's already tacky at this point, and it already sticks. It's super important that you work quick and you're always lining up the plastic as you're binding the core. I'm holding everything into place. I'm not squeezing too hard, or you can actually mush the plastic. And when you're looking at a 5-ply and one of your plies is 50% thinner than the rest, it's because it was squeezed too hard, right? So as I'm cooking along, it's already adhering in a beautiful way. I want to give it just the right amount of time to hold so it sets and it's ready for me to move on. If some of this material happens to get on the core itself, that's okay. In a perfect world, it would be the back side that I would see, not the front. So what I'm going to do is, because this being the back side of it, and this is my first layer, I'm just going to run a bead right along the back side, letting gravity help me out. And then this way, if there's any little areas that I might have missed, it'll creep in there and it'll form a beautiful, nice bond. So this is the point that I want to stop with my first layer on the outside, and I want to go ahead and put this aside. The time that it takes me to bind a second and a third one, this will be fused enough where I could start cutting and start sanding on it for my next piece. So I'm just going to go ahead and put this aside and start on the next one. As you're binding the guard, sometimes there's a little bit of solvent that actually drips onto the face, or what will be the face of the guard itself. If you don't allow the core itself and really the pickguard to finish curing before you sand and start finishing the guard, you might see some sinking under the finish where some of these drips are, right? But I'm not too worried about that, because we're going to let these pickguards cure for at least one full day after we finished adhering the plastic strips. Tomorrow or the following day, we'll go ahead and scrape and sand both sides down. From start to finish, we'll start putting finish on pick guards in day number 4 or 5, or maybe even a weekend after we bound the guards. This way, when you shoot the finish on top of it, you're not going to have any sinking issues. Right, Tony?
That's right.
All right, so in this one, because this is over 20 thousandths, it's not going to bend that easy. And what you don't want it to do is to force it into place and then glue it. So I'm going to help it along by melting some of the plastic to conform to the shape. I want to keep it moving because this is also very flammable. So once I let this go, as it cooled down, it's already taking some of that shape. I'm going to keep going back to it, and it's going to get to a point, you could almost see it, it's going to want to fall on itself. And I'm just going to hold it into place, and we're going to do this about 2 or 3 times. This time I want to focus right on the bend. That seems to be the spot that always has the hardest time. So now it's much, much closer to the shape that I'm wanting here. Now when I introduce the solvent, all I have to do is hold it down, and it doesn't take much effort at all, and it's already conforming to that shape that I really like. I also want to make sure that I don't overheat it, because just before it catches fire, it starts to ripple. And when you have that, a lot of times there's no coming back. All I'm doing is just lining it up to make sure that once I sand all of this down, my reveal is going to be nice and beautiful. And because I didn't ask very much of it, it's already in place, okay? So I'm going to keep holding it down. I'll give it another maybe 10 seconds or so. Then I'll turn around, I'm going to do the back end of it. So we're close. It's taking shape. You can see the rough outline of the core itself. I want to make sure that I'm taking my time here because I already have a number of plies on it. And there's no going back. Once it's sticking to the other layer of binding, there's no going back. You cannot separate it at that point. You might as well should start a new guard. We're looking good. We're staying, right? They're still soft at this point. I could still actually move my plies around a little bit. So that's why I'm really careful about how I'm holding it. You also notice that I have a little pre-bend in the guard itself. That's done for a reason. The last thing I'd want is to cup the other way. All right, a few more pieces, guys. All right, guys, so that was a full day's worth of work for Tony and I, and what we have to show for it is these 5 beautiful pick guards that are still very much in the rough. So what's left to go is we need to thickness these guards, create mounting strips for them.
And after that, we got to get a little bit of a tint on them so they don't look so stark white, so it blends in with the vintage instruments that they go on. And then we'll pick this up in another couple days.
See you guys in a little bit.